Hello everybody, welcome to our e-bike Lite shootout. Today we're going to be going over the Santa Cruz Heckler SL with a stout build. Let's dive in and see how it performs. So before we get into the bike, we'd like to take a quick second and thank Outdoor Research, Schwalbe Tires, and Ride Concepts Shoes for making this entire series possible. We have 11 bikes battling it out, and it has been a very fun and time-consuming process. So without their support, and of course the Running Y Resort here in Klamath Falls, we would not have been able to make this happen. So if you are looking for a place to come and ride, make sure you stay at the Running Y and use the code Loam Wolf. If you do, they will be donating some of the proceeds to the Klamath Trail Alliance to help maintain the trails and add even more miles of fun to the already awesome trail network they've got here.
For our stout build that comes in at $92.99, for suspension you get Fox Performance Series, bronze Maven brakes, race face wheels, of course our control test tires, which is the Schwalbe Albert Trail, and Maven brakes. This build, I think for that price point, is a little low in my opinion. You know,
and you didn't even talk about the cable actuated SRAM
sorry,
GX.
yes, and the cable, that's, yes, very true. One of I think 3 bikes that have cable actuated derailleurs on the test.
Yeah, so it's not the greatest value, I guess. Of course you're paying the Santa Cruz premium, and I guess when it comes to resale and some of the other attributes that you get along with the Santa Cruz, maybe that's worth it for some people, but it's still I think a talking point nevertheless.
I agree. Yeah, I think it's something to be of note at that price point, you know.
Yeah, over $9 grand, you should be getting AXS or some electronic drivetrain.
That's a huge.
Yeah. It's worth noting that the stout build weighs in at 45.6 pounds with the 430 watt-hour battery and the Fazua system. Jared, one of the other testers in our group, his wife, he just bought her a Heckler SL. Granted, it's a size small, but it's not the stout build, and I think her bike, he said, was around 42 pounds. So the stout build and the size large obviously does add some weight, but I also think it's the build that we probably would opt for, being more downhill biased riders. So Sean, lead it off here. What do you think about it? Let's start with the climbing and the Fazua drive unit.
I mean, the Fazua drive system is probably one of my favorites when it's working. It's a nice blend of comfort and power. Like you can casually cruise up if you want, or if you really want to put the torque down, you can be rewarded for that. I think it's a few minutes behind some of the full power bikes that we have on test and Travis's test designated test loop. So it's, I'd say, relatively efficient as well. I think it burned 270 watt hours off the battery during that 13-mile loop, 2,000 foot of elevation.
With a 210 pound test rider.
Yeah, in riding and boost exclusively.
Right,
which is reasonable.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I felt comfortable climbing the bike. It was probably one of the more comfortable bikes. Okay. Yeah, I got no real complaints, and I mean, cable actuated drivetrain worked fine.
Yeah. Your thumb didn't fall off?
It didn't.
Okay.
The brakes though,
gosh.
I know it's one thing I want to make sure we notice. We've had very mixed luck with the Mavens on this trip. Some are working great.
Yeah, and even before the trip.
Yeah, and these ones specifically have developed both sides a very heavy squeak cue soundbite.
Yeah, the performance of the brakes has remained reliable, which is not what we can say for all of the Mavens we have. Some of them have needed the piston massage treatment. Some of them have needed full bleeds. You know, I think we're batting at about a 50% average of SRAM Mavens coming on test bikes that don't require work or maintenance. These have performed well, but they're just really annoyingly squeaky and loud. So that being said, let's get into what I think is the best part of Santa Cruz bikes, and that is the handling, the playfulness, the snappiness. I think, you know, most of you guys all know I'm not the biggest fan of VPP stuff, but I absolutely think Santa Cruz nails geo, handling, and play, like on the ground playfulness. Coming in, like some of these trails, like you'd come out of a corner and you'd kind of be on some side hill single track, and there'd be like these little like kind of rise speed checky ups back into little dips. And like you could come into those corners late or too fast because you overjumped something, and like you don't even have to have your hands on the brakes. You can just point the bars and put your heels out, and the back of that bike will just drift and scrub speed. It will snap into corners.
It does that without feeling disconnected from the front wheel.
Totally, yeah. I mean, I really like steering the bike with the back wheel, and this bike allows me to do that easier than anything else. It is awesome. So yeah, climbing comfort I think is really nice. The reach on the size large is 480 mil, which I love.
Perfect,
you know,
really,
I'm
yeah.
5'11", 6-ish foot, 6'2", so I think we all got along with that 480 reach, and God, I think they nail the numbers and how these bike handles.
Feel very inside the bike. You know, there's some bikes when you ride, you might feel like you're kind of top heavy, or you're too over the front or not over the front enough. This bike in particular gave me a very centered feel, but like low in it. Like
Yeah.
It doesn't have the craziest amount of stack, but all that combined together equates to a very in the bike feel. And for me, when I have a bike like that, my confidence goes up, brakes come off, and then that's when this bike really shines. And I think, you know, from some of the other bikes on test that have more travel, I feel that I am more confident going into some rough terrain on this bike, because I know that sketchy corner at the bottom, I'm going to be able to just dip that bar in and come out of it. And that makes a big difference for me.
Okay. Sean, thoughts on suspension and overall performance going downhill on the bike?
I mean, I was pretty surprised. I mean, listening to you and complaining about VPP all the time, I was just expecting the harshest ride, even on the chunkiest stuff. So I kind of aired down a little bit on that rear shock, and once I did that, I could blast through the rocks and it wouldn't throw me offline. It felt pretty good. Like I kind of approached riding this bike more with the play style, like not trying to nuke down the hill as fast as I could, but just try to hit side hits and just catch air and just have fun with it. And I thought it did very well.
On that VPP topic of you not maybe being a fan, I know you ride a little bit lighter on the bike. I tend to ride a little bit heavier, and I didn't feel a lot of those drawbacks initially. I also have probably the least amount of time out of anyone here on VPP systems, so I don't have any preconceived notions of what I really should be expecting. And I've only ridden them on e-bikes.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something to be considered. And Sean mentions you just want to play. For me, this was not just one of the most fun bikes to play on. I felt the fastest.
Okay. Yeah, I think for me, when I had the shock dialed, obviously we circulate the bike, so I think there's 5 or 6 of us testing, so
Everything gets screwed up.
yeah, you know, shock settings and obviously mileage, dust, like dirt. I mean, these bikes have seen a lot of use and abuse over the last couple months, but there were definitely some rides where the suspension was dialed. As the week, you know, this final week progressed, I felt like it got a little harder to find and keep my consistency in the tune, and maybe that's just shock needing service, right? But I found that if I did run a little bit more sag, it would alleviate some of the chatter and harshness that I feel, that little bit of a spike in energy, like coming up through the pedal and the rear wheel when I would hit stuff that, you know, I'm kind of unweighting and skipping over, and it would just glance over the top of that rock. It would transmit a bit unless I ran it a little softer. It's getting better. Every generation, right, is improving. And as we saw actually with the release of the latest Santa Cruz e-bike Davala, they've gone to a Horst link suspension platform and away from VPP. But nevertheless, I really did like this bike, and amongst like some of the recent Santa Cruz, I think I even rode a Heckler SL last year, a different one, and I think maybe this shock's just a little bit better than the last year's shock I had on there, but this bike does feel a bit better. And when you have the shock tune right, I just think there's a narrower margin, right? Like, because if you're off by a few PSI, and like, I mean, a shock pump could be just off by that few PSI. It's a pretty narrow window. And all of a sudden I started feeling that stiffness and harshness.
We measured sag, you know, we set it up.
Oh yeah,
right
yeah.
things.
The other thing I would note, like on the playfulness side, is that 45.6 pounds, it was one of the I mean, it was up there in weight, and I thought like maybe it was because of how I had to have the shock set for the way I wanted the compliance and traction to feel, but I didn't feel it was as light and fluttery and poppy on like some of the smaller jump lines as like some of the other shorter travel bikes or bikes in this travel category.
It's definitely more ground playful.
Yes,
like
on the ground, it is probably the most fun bike.
It has, you can still pop and do the side hits and all that fun stuff, but it definitely is more playful in turns and changing your lines and doing things like that.
Yeah, and I feel like that's something we commonly say about this Float X2 shock.
That is one of the things I want to touch on. I think this bike would be served with that float that we all really like.
Right, which probably is, not, I mean, you could do that, I'm sure, but part of the stout build, right, is the burliness and
at
all that.
$92.99, how much more do you want to spend?
Yeah, I don't know. So, yeah, overall though, what are your thoughts, ideal rider, consumer for this thing?
I mean, it's well served for almost everybody, I think. Maybe the trail rider or light enduro rider, somebody that just likes to go out, have fun, but not necessarily want to bash the gnarliest stuff down the mountain.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree, but I also think with the confidence, at least in my riding style, that I wouldn't really steer away from a lot of features.
Yeah.
I also think even less aggressive riders and newer riders to the sport would benefit from this because of how agile and confidence inspiring it is.
Okay. Yeah, provided they want to spend $300 on a bike. So, okay, well, there you have it, folks. The Santa Cruz Heckler SL in the stout build. A very fun bike, undeniably fun, and I would say one of the most playful bikes on the ground, and something that we all really, really enjoyed riding. Jared and Travis also both really loved this bike. So thanks again to Outdoor Research, Schwalbe Tires, and Ride Concepts for helping make this series possible. And of course, our YouTube members, they are also a huge part of allowing us to do these awesome kind of shootouts and the Running Y Resort. If you guys haven't yet, please consider subscribing to the channel. Leave any comments or questions you have on this bike down below. And thanks for watching. Make sure you stay tuned for the roundtable where we put this bike against all the other 10 bikes in this year's e-bike Lite shootout. Thanks for watching.